Welcome to Business Leader Breakthroughs, where we help unlock the potential in you, your teams, and your business. I'm your host, Ryan Castle, along with Dr. Mike Ashby. We'll share insights, experiences, and stories on achieving breakthrough success in business and life. To learn more, click the link in the episode show notes or go to thebreakthrough.co. Now let the breakthroughs begin. Mike, welcome along to this episode of the podcast. Good to have my partner in crime back in the house.
Fun, isn't it? And literally in the house, because of course we're in the middle of lockdown, and hopefully by the time people are seeing this, we are free.
That would be good. And boy, this lockdown is providing challenge for us in all sorts of directions.
Oh yeah.
I think we should, certainly acknowledge that where we are, we're very fortunate to have, minor number of cases, but still, when our business audience thinks about the impact of the lockdowns to our business and to our people directly, there's still some pretty significant things going on.
Yeah, I've been reflecting on that. I've just done a blog, which will be out by the time you're watching this. But it's, I think we are only starting to scratch the surface of the emotional impact of lockdown, COVID, whatever. It's a kind of this. I use the analogy of a rising tide at night. You can't quite track what it's about, where it's coming from, but increasingly, I think business leaders at all levels have to be very aware of the long-term impact that this is having on people, has had and is continuing to have on people, including themselves. But that's a topic for another day, right?
It is a topic for another day, but a very relevant one. So I think we should cover that, because we've had a couple of really useful insights with our own team members and with other business leaders around the place where that is valuable. But look, today the word that we want to talk about is contribution. I think we've had lots of insight and discussion broadly in the leader community around, so how do I kind of manage and lead people when we're in lockdown, out of lockdown, working from home, in the office, kind of partly in the office, lots of screen time, Zooms, etc. And you've done some fantastic work around this, Mike, thinking about, I guess, where the continuum goes from let's measure time at a desk as a measure of whether people are adding value to our organisation, through to that word productivity, which is a concept that management gurus have talked about for years, about how do you measure productivity and how do we improve it. And you've really taken that thinking to the next level. So where did your thinking around this contribution thing start?
Well, it actually started before COVID was even a thing. It started at a conversation at a board table at a joinery factory, and I just kind of, sometimes have those moments of real clarity, and they're relatively rare, I'll have to say. But I did have one. And it was, what does this organisation need to do? It needs to improve its communication, because communication between people was poor. There needs to be better teamwork, and there needs to be more of a learning mindset. And to me, that was all about collaboration, about how you get people contributing ideas that are going to make a difference, that are going to see the business improve. And then I was kind of reflecting on that, and in the context then of COVID, and for that matter, the Black Lives Matter protests as well. And I started to think about the idea of contribution. I talked about it last year at a session, and it's just stayed with me as being a really interesting and important concept, not just in organisations, but wider too.
So how wide does it go? Are we talking about just an individual leader managing the direct team? Is it organisation wide? Is it community wide? So how wide are you thinking here?
Well, I think it starts with the individual, and that is where I started. I started with the individual, and then thought, well, yeah, inside an organisation, people want to make a contribution, but they've got to be enabled by their managers, and that's got to be kind of authorised by their leaders. Now, actually, the whole relationship outside the walls of the organisation, the contribution you make to customers, the contribution we make to our community, actually it goes wider than that, particularly in the context of some of the social justice protests, to our society, and then actually right out to the planet. So it's kind of, it's got some big span.
Yeah, so it's timely around COVID, but it's not only associated with COVID. Probably COVID have highlighted some things like being forced to work where we can't collaborate so directly. But the concept you're talking about is broader than just a reaction to COVID.
Yeah, it is, and I think what's happened is actually, along with some of those kind of subterranean fears that COVID and lockdown play into, I think it's also forced a process of reflection. And I think it's different, the opportunity we've got to think about contribution in terms of society and the planet and our customers and internally. I think it's partly driven by the fact that people have had time to really reflect on what's important in their lives. And I think that was lockdown. That was kind of spending time with family and thinking about, whether they were thinking about it directly and explicitly, or whether it was, again, just kind of subtly by osmosis, reconsidering what's really important. And I think we wouldn't have these conversations. I wouldn't be advancing this proposition if it hadn't been for that process.
Okay, so let's dig into what contribution looked like. Great word. There's probably multiple different interpretations out there as to what contribution means. What's your take on it? What does it sort of look like day to day?
Well, I did some research on it. Actually, I didn't find very much on it at all in the literature, which was interesting. There's a lot of talk about engagement and collaboration and stuff like that. And I thought, well, actually, you can be engaged but still not contributing. I think contribution, that idea that you do something are something beyond just what's in your job description. An interesting example, when I was talking to one of our clients, and I said, I'm doing this stuff on contribution. And they said, oh yeah, we've got it in our performance review. What was your contribution to the culture? And I said, well, how does that go? No, it doesn't. People don't get it. I said, well, what would happen if you changed that to contribution to the team? And they go, that's different. And I said, well, what are your contributions to the team? And we had this conversation, and one guy said, well, I think I'm the guy that people can come to. I always have been, that they can come to and have a conversation about, some of the stuff that's bothering them. And another guy had, he thinks he felt that his contribution was about tidying up the details. It's not in the job description, but actually it's a really fundamental thing. And the other guy, his contribution was, actually my job is to kind of look out into the future and see where we're going. I thought, that's what I mean by contribution. In our own team, we look at the people in the team, and beyond the job description, what do they contribute? What do we contribute? And it's not just in our titles and in our. Have you got a job description?
I don't think so.
I don't think I've got one either. Which is
I've always felt they were reasonably redundant because they always have that last line in them says and anything else that's required.
Yeah.
Why don't we just have that one line? Because that's pretty much the gig, isn't it?
Yeah. But I mean, our contributions to the team and to the culture, for that matter, are more than just what we do. It's how we are. It's what we bring. It's what we give. It's what we give. So I think it's, at an individual level, I think people want to make a contribution.
Many traditional management practices have kind of put a lid on contribution because we've been so obsessed with productivity and list ticking and how many things have you got completed this week. And I think we observe all the time in organisations where lots of stuff is getting done, but it's really not moving the organisation forward a whole lot. And when you bring that mindset of contribution, you start going, so how am I contributing to those around me? How am I contributing to the team? How am I contributing to what the organisation is trying to achieve overall? Mm-hmm. You start, exploring some pretty interesting questions.
I think it changes the question, and of course that it changes the answer. And I think you're right, the productivity piece. We've been measuring engagement as if that's the kind of holy grail. But actually engagement is just how motivated people feel to do their work. The contribution piece is over and above that. You can be really engaged in your work and getting your work done without any thought of how that relates to anybody else or to the organisation or to where, the kind of the dynamic in the team and how, all those things, those wider things. those social things that we're finding, you know, in the context of lockdown are so important. It's not just about achievement. It's not just about, you know, what did you do? It's what did you contribute?
Yeah, and we're seeing some of our clients really grasp this concept of contribution, and a fantastic experience that I've observed. One of the organisations that I'm on their advisory board, they have a member of their team. She's just fantastic. She's culture glue. You know, she brings that team together, just does a phenomenal job, and they have recognised how important her role is in the organisation, to the point that they're bringing her now in as a shareholder and equity partner.
Great.
Now, she, by way of title, she performs a role in the business that wouldn't normally be associated with getting equity in a business like theirs, but they just get the fact that without her bringing the team together, that contribution of culture that she makes and togetherness, that they would be a much lesser organisation. It's very cool to see.
Yeah, and it's great to see people thinking about it in that. It's in a way that, you know, we could say, well, that would happen anyway, but putting the framework of contribution around it actually says, okay, that's where we're getting that contribution. It also invites the question about the rest of the management team, what their contribution is, and then you go, if this is my kind of contribution, how can I contribute more? How can I be more in this organisation? I think that comes down to the role of leaders. If you distinguish between the manager and the leader, you know, the manager, to my way of thinking, is they work with individuals, and leaders work with teams and organisations. That's our simple kind of way of dividing things up. The leaders have to set the direction for the business. They have to authorise this idea of contribution, both from themselves, but inviting their managers to think about it, so that the managers can then work that concept with their team pretty much. So I think it's a really powerful way of thinking about the dynamic that goes on inside an organisation.
Okay, so let's get really practical for a moment. I'm a manager, I'm leading a group of people, I'm maybe in an operations team type environment. I've been used to asking people, what have they completed this week? What's been your achievement? How productive have you been? You know, what would be a way I could, as a manager, could I shape a different conversation?
Well, what we've done, and, you know, we've only just kind of started on this journey, but what we've done is simply said in the team meeting, the weekly team meeting, you know, what was your biggest contribution last week? Separate from what you achieved, what was your biggest contribution? And it's not always what you think. So, you know, inviting people at the team meeting to say, okay, what was your biggest contribution in the previous week? And often that's not just about what work did you get done or what did you achieve. It's maybe what did that achievement represent? What was something that you did in either a work or maybe even a non-work setting that represented a contribution, you know, a giving, giving something of yourself? It's so much more than, because it's voluntary, it's discretionary, it's kind of not necessary, it's not formally part of what you're doing, but it's making a difference. I suppose it's another way of saying, how did you make a difference?
Yeah.
So you can do it at that practical level, I think, is what we're practicing. But then I think we can look outside the organisation as well.
Tell me more.
I started to think about it in terms of the layers. You know, there's inside the walls of the organisation, and then the first layer, if you like, the first ring is the customers. With our customers and our clients, especially at the moment, with the massive amount of disruption that nearly all of us have faced, is what's the contribution we're making to their business? What's more than kind of what's the value, what's the commercial relationship? How are we making them feel? You know, do they feel that their business is more secure because of what we're bringing to them? Do they feel more confident about the future because of the relationship we're having? You know, what's the real value we're adding in this time of kind of deep questioning about where are we going, what's going to happen with the economy, what's going to happen with our business? What does that relationship look like now? And I think it's got to be more than just the transactions that we've had to date. There needs to be more of a relationship piece, and we need to think about how we contribute to that. The same goes for suppliers as well. Looking at it just at another dimension.
I think a good example of that, Mike, is the partners we work with. We have a fantastic group that help deliver our programs into our member base, and we're always going, well, how could we add value to them? How could we contribute to them? And so hosting events in those old days, we used to be able to get people together physically, but bringing them together and sharing knowledge and insights and learnings, which for them is really valuable because they tend to spend a lot of time delivering that for clients, but often don't get the opportunity to do it themselves. So just giving that as a contribution has been a good way to help our partners. As simple as that, help our partners.
Yeah, and look, even in our marketing, we've been talking for a while about building a community of interest for operational leaders. And actually the impulse is not buy from us. The impulse is, how can we make a contribution to that community, to people who we would like to have a relationship with, not necessarily a business relationship or a kind of commercial relationship, but a relationship based around helping each other do better work. And it does start from that motivation of contribution. This is a good way to make a contribution to people, free of the pressure of selling or marketing or prospecting or anything else like that. It's just, you know what, we think this would be of value to you. Here, have this. Mm-hmm. I think the other piece that I reflect on for, not so much, I guess, from our own point of view, but for businesses, is this is really a time to make a contribution to your community by buying local. With so many businesses that are under the pump, finding a way to buy local is going to be really, really important. And you don't have to, it's not mandatory. There's nobody requiring it. But again, to come to the idea of a contribution being a voluntary, discretionary giving, then I think it's a great time to think about how we can support local business.
And you make me think of that fantastic movie, Pay It Forward.
Yeah.
Of going, actually what makes us feel fantastic as humans is when we do something for someone else and we don't do it because we want something reciprocated, but actually going, hey, I did something great for you. Now, if you did something great for someone going forward, we can create a better environment, a better community, a better globe. By all taking a moment to pay it forward. And I think we can do that at a micro level of going, I can engage with a team member, not because it's part of my KPIs, not because it was on my to-do list today, but, maybe just spending 5 or 10 minutes having the discussion with them was the thing that made a huge contribution to them and what was going on for them in their world.
And, you can kind of walk past that opportunity. You see somebody who's maybe struggling a bit or has done good work, whichever, and you can walk past it and just kind of keep it pretty simple. Or you can choose to make a contribution and sit down and find out what's really going on, or take the time to invest a little more in the relationship, to make a contribution to them and to their day. I guess the pay it forward piece, you do it for the motivation of doing it. And yet, very often, it comes around. So we had the example I would have is I was asked to speak at the Greater East Tamaki Business Association, where 10 years ago, it turns out, the director out there, Jane Tamatule, and I devised this Business Owners Forum, and it's still going strong. And I haven't been there. You took over from me as the facilitator, I guess 4 or 5 years ago. Yep. And we haven't been out there for a while. Jane invited me to speak. I thought, great, love to. And it was just to make a contribution because, it's not our target market. There's no good marketing reason to do it. It was simply to share some thoughts about what's happening and how to think of it, to add some value, to make a contribution. Actually, out of that, I made a connection at the meeting, which has subsequently turned into a really significant opportunity. Not why I did it, but that's the karma of it, right? Karma doesn't always run over your dogma.
Totally. And we're obviously Black Lives Matter is a significant and important movement now. Do you see an intersection between kind of contribution and the Black Lives Matter?
Yeah. This was. I guess it was a couple of months ago when the protests were at their height, and I was thinking, what's really going on here? And what was interesting, because what was going on was there was a massive shift in sympathy, and there has been over the years, particularly since Black Lives Matter started in about 2014. Michael Brown, the young black guy who was killed by police, I think, it started there, and increasingly public support has shifted away from kind of, we don't have a right, and particularly in the US, really interesting research that says people now recognise we do have a problem with racism in this country, and that is now a majority view, which is really significant. What's the importance of it? I think, to me, again, that was that process of reflection of people in lockdown and going, you know what, this is just, I mean, there was something about the way that the graphic, callous nature of the video, the way Chauvin, was killed this guy, basically on camera without a flicker of emotion, and his colleagues just stood around. It was so unbelievably callous, brutal. It was disgusting, right? So there was something about that where it kind of magnified the issue. But I think it captured a moment in time of, with the lockdown, just people reflecting on what's important. And the idea that this is just not right. The reality is, we, Ryan, you and I, white males, we're advantaged. We always have been, and we continue to be. And I just want to share a slide that, so what this says is that, the first column there is the proportion of people entering as professionals. So 36% of people who enter the profession are white men, 16% men of colour, 4% are black men. White women, 31%, 17% women of colour, black women, just 5%. So you get the idea. Now, what it shows is through the progression from entry level to C-suite, that's the proportion. That's the change in proportion. So white men are 36% of entry-level professionals, and they are 68% of the C-suite. White women, 31% of entry-level, not bad, but that drops to 19% by the time you get to the C-suite. If you're a black woman, you're barely on the margin of error. 5% entry-level and 1% in the C-suite. I think that that tells an enormous story about the number of whammies that people face outside the white. There's only one group that grows in proportion, and that's white men. And it's time to fix it. I think it's as simple as that. It's time to fix it.
What do you think are steps that we can take to do that? Because I think it's really easy as white males for us to sit and put up a graphic like that and go, oh, that's terrible. That shouldn't be happening.
Yeah.
But what do we do? What do we do differently?
We can continue. Look, we can use the argument, well, we're only kind of appointing on merit. I think where we've got the opportunity between, a straight white male and a non-straight white male, and even if the non-straight white male is perhaps little less experienced, a little less qualified, actually going, we're going to give that person a chance. Because what that graph shows is the straight white male is going to be fine. That's not an issue. Whinging about reverse prejudice and what's wrong with being a straight white male, etc. That misses the point. That graphic is the point. Yes. What's wrong with it? Nothing's wrong with it. It's just that, the game is skewed towards you because, of course, the straight white males in the C-suite recruit straight white males. So that's what needs to change. I think a more making a contribution to society by looking for opportunities to create greater diversity. It's what we're looking for with diversity and inclusion is the range of experiences, people that with different backgrounds, different cultures, they have different insights. That's of value to a business, but it's also of value to society. The McKinsey piece that analysis is drawn from highlights the ongoing penalty that those disadvantaged groups continue to suffer, because How do they get out of that trap if they never make it into the C-suite? How do they get out of that kind of circle? So the contribution we can make is absolutely where we've got a choice to make a positive decision, a contribution to society. Even choosing that one person who comes from a disadvantaged background, the impact that has inside their community is really, really significant. Really significant. So I think it's a really important opportunity to think about it, at least to think about it, instead of saying, well, it's not my problem, I just hire a merit.
Yeah.
Try a little harder.
Yeah. Yep. Try a little harder and ask the question, what's my contribution here, across all aspects of your life? So what's your contribution in the work setting? What's your contribution to community when you bring people into your employment? What's your contribution in your community? What's your contribution to people in your personal relationships? I think if as we've experienced, if you just ask that question often, actually it helps shape your thinking and therefore help shape your action.
Yeah, that's right. It's just putting it into part of our kind of consciousness, the contribution piece through repetition and regular kind of visiting of it. It just becomes part of the framework that we use to think about how we operate.
Yeah, and I think we'd say that it's a higher quality question. It's really easy to do the what did I do today? Yeah. What did I tick off the list today? Those are really easy questions. But often you look at what you ticked off the list and you're like, yeah, I got some stuff done, but did it contribute to me? Did it contribute to those around me? Did it contribute to the organisation? I think if you take a solid critical look, often you'll find that actually it didn't contribute that much.
Yeah.
So
it's kind of, as you said earlier, like you framed productivity versus contribution. If we're obsessed with productivity, then what space does that leave for higher purpose for contribution? And look, I think it goes all the way to how we contribute to the planet. Again, we can take a kind of a sort of a benign indifference view. Well, it's not really our job, but actually things like the packaging that we use, how we use energy, the kinds of suppliers that we use, just making the effort to think about how they contribute and therefore how we're contributing to the planet. I used the analogy the other day. I was out walking the dog and I was just walking along the waterfront there, and there was, there were bits of plastic that had been washed up by a storm, and I was picking up the bits of plastic and then, well, this is, it was in the sense of, this is a contribution at a really micro level, and it's totally insignificant in the scheme of things. I have not, and I'm the first to criticise empty gestures. This is not an empty gesture. And I thought it's actually a bit like voting. My vote isn't going to change the government. And picking up, doing my little bit in my little community, my little, stretch of grass and waterfront is at one level insignificant, and yet it's every bit as significant as voting. Because if everybody does that, when everybody votes, when everybody picks up bits of plastic, when everybody tries to make a contribution, thinks about how to make a contribution to the planet, to their community, to their business, to their people, that's when change happens. It's got to be at that level that we need to think. We need to, as you said, rethink how we operate and continue to kind of rehearse it.
And if you need some practice around contribution, there's some really easy ones at the moment, like wear a mask when you're out in public and practice good hand hygiene. I mean, it's contribution, right? If one person does it in isolation, it doesn't change much. If you get an entire community or an entire city or an entire population all making that one small contribution, actually it can make a massive, massive difference to a whole lot of things.
Case in point, Taiwan, we're sitting here congratulating ourselves, and yes, we've had a resurgence, etc., etc. Taiwan, they have had 7 deaths in the whole period. They have effectively, they manage it, and one of the things they do, so they haven't entirely eliminated it, but they have had very few cases, and they haven't had to do the lockdown. And one of the reasons for that, one of the primary reasons, is because wearing masks is not a protective thing, it's a contribution. Wearing masks is so that I wear a mask as a way of respecting my neighbours so that I don't infect them, not to protect myself. As with the social distancing and the hygiene, they got onto it very, very quickly, right? So they closed their borders very, very quickly. which helped enormously. It didn't get away with it. But we know how insidious this virus is. They still have not had a resurgence, and it's because how they think about their contribution. Like there's 23 million people in a country the size of Canterbury. They have had to learn how to get on and how to kind of, make a contribution to each other to kind of to keep their civil society together. But what an interesting example of exactly what you say. Wearing a mask is not to protect myself, it's to make sure that I don't infect others.
Spot on. Hey, great concept for us to close on, Mike, and I'd like to acknowledge you for your contribution around the thinking on contribution. This is important thinking for you as an individual, for you and I as business partners, for our team, for our organisation, for our community of clients and partners that we work with, and then obviously extending even further out into the broader community sense. So thanks for the insights and the thinking. It's really powerful.
Thanks, Ryan. And listen, I want to make a contribution of this. I'm trying to get in front of the Harvard Business Review, which is quite a process. So I've written quite a long piece on this concept, some of which we've talked about here today. And if people are interested, we'll make it available. It's a bit too long to post as a blog. Is there another format? What would we call that?
Oh, look, we can do it as an article on LinkedIn, and we can also make it available as a download. So we'll put that into the show notes.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I'd like to have that opportunity to make a contribution.
Well said, Mike. Catch you on the next episode.
Cheers, Ryan.